So each of these pillars underpin what it means to do science in general, to be a scientist, to get your funding, to handle your data, how you publish it, how you share it, how you store it, the publishing of those prints themselves, how you handle the papers that you write, how you get incentivized for doing those papers, and the organization, how you organize yourself from the very bottom, doing the research, getting the access to the resources, to the very top, making the research into a product, for example, or organizing with other researchers and collaborating. So DeSci is doing all of these things as a whole space, but at individual project levels as well. What can DeSci achieve? So ultimately there's kind of two core paths in DeSci. There's the innovation path, which is using DeSci to improve the speed of innovation, the range of innovation, what products can be produced, what science can be done, unshackled from the regulatory environment. And then there's the other side, which is this sort of purist, decentralized ethos, which is doing science, but doing the citizen science, doing science and keeping all of the profits, all of the proceeds within the scientific industry itself, redistributing that to scientists, redistributing that to patients, to those that need the money more than the corporations which seek a lot of value and steal a lot of value from the science itself. So these two factors, right now we're going to talk about the innovation, because the purist stuff we can talk all day about, but it's very philosophical. But the innovation side of it is severely stunted by several factors, including misaligned funding. Funding can go to different sources that ultimately benefit the profitability of some of these ventures, rather than the ability for the science to change things, to improve patient outcomes, to improve research outcomes. Selective funding does that. Misaligned incentives changes what it means to be, it disrupts the ability for scientists to do the science that they wish to do. If you have to, because the incentives there are there for you to do the science that you're required to do in order to get the grants, to get the publishing, to get the funding, you have to change necessarily what it is that you're hoping to research or hoping to solve. And this can be as dramatic as completely rearranging your school of thought, completely changing what you want to study, or it can be as subtle as maybe studying one isotope different, or one chemical different, or maybe studying whether or not this chemical can be combined for a cleaning product rather than can be used or broken down for a medicine. Institutional constraints allow a lot of great innovation, a lot of great research, a lot of great integral research as well, because people are all together and they're very well regulated, and there's a lot of great knowledge shared, and the institutions are hundreds of years old, and there's a reason for that. But we're in Belgrade right now, and a very famous Belgrade scientist, Nikola Tesla, he was famously uninstitutional. He did a lot of fantastic research, a lot of fantastic innovation, made incredible inventions which we still use today. However, he was effectively on the outside, and he suffered greatly for that. Who knows what the truth is about his death and about his experiments and about some of his inventions that have not seen the light of day with regards in particular to AC and DC power. These are all very interesting concepts, but who knows? But he was constrained by the institutions because he was not accepted. His innovations, his science was too disruptive at many points, and this caused him to be put on the back foot and to be shunned almost by most of mainstream academia. Who knows what innovations could have happened if he was given the tools, the framework to publish his own research in an efficient manner, to collaborate with the relevant scientists to get funding. And accessibility concerns. If you are from a nation or a country or a continent even that typically is left on the outside of economic progress, it's very difficult for you to access science and access the resources, access the knowledge, access the funding. So what we're doing at DeSciWorld, in particular with the World of DeSci conference, is we're trying to go around the world to places outside of the traditional sort of economic West and empower scientists around the world to get access to the funding, get access to the resources, and to get access to these wonderful protocols which are being built on a decentralized blockchain. If you're in Africa, for example, if you're in Nairobi and you're trying to research some groundbreaking tech, you more often than not have to go to a Western university to get the resources that you need for that. This brain drain cements and compounds the issue, and therefore most economies stay on the outside because of this. Their best and brightest have to leave. DeSci will hopefully solve many things within the research paradigm, but it's also an economic benefit as well. So DeSci proposes a solution by decentralizing science and academia using blockchain technologies to remove these gatekeepers, open up the funding sources, and make diversity of opportunity much broader. So what is standing in DeSci's way? Well, many things, of course. But at DeSciWorld, we are trying to solve some of these issues. So primarily, DeSci is a very early, very nascent space, and it's incredibly disorganized. Belief in this technology of DeSci, belief in Web3 and decentralized technology in general, is quite shaky. Adoption from institutions is still some ways off. We mentioned briefly about the Pfizer Ventures investing through VitaDAO, and that was the flagship and probably the only, give or take, the only flagship that people are clinging to right now. But it does show there is some promise here. And the user experience does leave a lot to be desired. This is true for Web3 and crypto in general. Web3 and crypto in general is pretty average in terms of its UX. It's quite difficult to get used to. It's very easy to lose money. It's very easy to lose access to your keys. Rob, I think your platform looks very beautiful, and that's really great, but also you have the UX improvements on the side of custodial and solving some of those issues and not being able to handle your funds very easily or very safely. So how can we push DeSci forward? Well, at DeSciWorld, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve organization amongst peers and projects within the DeSci ecosystem and within the traditional academia. For example, inviting people from universities around Belgrade to this event is great to show this integration. We're inspiring belief in the power of today's decentralized technologies. Presentations like this, presentations like the one just before, hopefully can get people quite excited about, as a scientist, how can it improve your process as a scientist? How can it improve your access to funding and to resources? And we want to provide economically useful use cases, okay? People will not come here to DeSci unless it's valuable or profitable, especially the institutions. Scientists may do, but it's not hard to be more profitable for a scientist in the new system than it is in the current system. And we want to improve the user experience and the onboarding flows for people trying to get into DeSci. Here are some examples of the ecosystem. For those that are unaware, VitaDAO, the one we've been talking about that has the Pfizer Ventures investment, is here. This is DeSci Labs. I think they recently raised $6.5 million in seed funding. LabDAO here, they recently raised $3.6 million. Opsiencia and Holonym, I can't remember, I think it's like $2.5 million or something. So this shows that there is a lot of interest in this space and it's actually progressing quite rapidly. So back to these original 4 points. Organization is something key to the science infrastructure. Scientists working together is how science is done. It's very rarely is it born of one man's idea. It's one person's idea combined with the ideas of many others. Even within the theoretical physics space, you get Stephen Hawking and 10 of his other crazy buddies in a house somewhere talking about these things. I've watched the documentaries, it seems crazy. So the advent of a DAO in particular, the decentralized autonomous organization using Web3 and blockchain is going to make this organization much more smooth, much more powerful. Things like treasury management solutions using DeFi. If you're a scientist and you are putting together some money for funding to fund your research, but you can use that money to create more money, for example, leveraging it through DeFi for yield, or turning it into, or using token-gated governance to decide how that treasury is used. So the scientists working on the project are the ones that decide how the funding is used. This sort of level of security and composability with the decentralized finance infrastructure is really valuable for scientists. Incentive mechanisms can be designed at will. The beauty of the blockchain is that it's code-based and it's pretty creative. People are doing some fantastic things with tokenomics to show that you can actually design your token infrastructure how it fits best with your organization. If you decide that a scientist that produces a certain amount of research outcomes should deserve a certain amount of governance rights, you can code that into the system. So it's inherent from the beginning, and a lot of scientists would probably quite appreciate this sort of open nature to how their incentives work. Rather than it being randomized, rather than it being bureaucratic, it's kind of laid out in the code. And collaboration is far easier in DAOs because ultimately they kind of all operate on one operating system. Be it a sidechain or an EVM chain or a non-EVM chain, there is a lot of compatibility between all of these, and the infrastructure is being built out even more so. Inspiration about DeSci, inspiration about science in general, is something that's quite sorely lacking. I think in a world where ChatGPT can do a lot of people's jobs very quickly, even some quite technical jobs can do it quite instantly, it's quite demoralizing. And this pace of innovation in science has slowed quite rapidly. A lot of scientists receive a lot of backlash from people outside of science for the work that they do, especially in areas such as gene therapy, areas such as pharmaceuticals and healthcare in general. There's a lot of backlash from people who don't do the science because it's quite misunderstood, and it's very opaque. The potential of DeSci to not only revolutionize science and their academic infrastructure, but also this belief in the system is huge. And for me, it's the biggest part of what DeSci can do, is it can really put a lot of faith back into the concept of science. This bottom point here, pursuing your own truth. Now, we live in a Judeo-Christian, rationalist thinking society, globally really, but especially here in the West, well, in the global North. And this is great. It's led us to this fantastic place where we are now, where I can use this and this computer and this microphone, and it's fantastic. But it's not the only school of thought that has led humanity to where we are today. There are multiple other schools of thought, Eastern schools of thought, for example, which led humanity to, Middle Eastern in particular, led humanity for the first 10,000 years of its real civilization, maybe longer, who knows. These schools of thought have been shunned out of science for the past 500 years in particular, but maybe 2,000 years since the Greek times, really. And this, whilst has led us to here, does actually potentially hold us back from innovation. There are some things that scientists recognize we do not know, and they try to explain it away with concepts that we understand, such as like particle physics, for example. Particle physics is one agreed upon by everyone, but there are some things that the particle physics structure does not solve. There's some answers that it does not answer. And these are some interesting schools of thought around this that people might be able to explore through the DeSci paradigm. What this looks like, who knows? But getting the funding, getting the structure to have empirical research on these matters is actually really important. When it remains sort of theoretical and quite airy-fairy like this, it's very hard to pin down, and it's very hard to get any following. But when you can actually fund and publish and collaborate in a data-driven, empirical manner, it could change the game. Earning a fair share here is also a very important thing. As a scientist, it's very likely that you will pursue science for the passion of doing the science, rather than for the fact that it's an economically viable career. A lot of people will go to do their PhD, realize they're going to be poor for the rest of their life if they continue along this life, and then they decide to go into business or some kind of corporation, and they do so from there. And that's fantastic. It works for a lot of people. But it does withhold the pure interest of science. Scientists used to be much more highly sought, much more highly respected in the sort of sense of being given much more money for their work. Back in the sort of Enlightenment days, this is what drove most of the innovation, was the fact that it was a viable alternative to be a scientist. Now, lots of scientists, not a lot of funding. All the funding tends to go in the back pockets of the funding organizations. Redistributing this to scientists themselves might improve the ability for people to make a living out of their passion. And these use cases is what's going to bring people, we hope, to DeSci. So here are some examples of different types of use cases within DeSci. Publishing, for example, the access and the collaboration potential through SciNFT. The incentive models, you can sell your own research. You can maybe pay per citation. If you have a piece of research that is used in many other pieces of research, maybe you could get paid per citation. The way the structure of the blockchain and the structure of tokenomics allows much more in-depth incentive mechanisms to have distribution. For example, through Protocol Labs' new impact certificates, the hypercerts. The more impact that your research does, the more likely it is you'll receive return, and those that contributed along the way will also receive their fair share of the revenue. These are brand new mechanisms still in experimentation, but it shows the way that we can move forward. DeSci, in my opinion, is the most salient use case for blockchain technologies. DeFi is fantastic, and it's a very necessary part of it. It's almost a foundation of which all of this will be built upon. But DeSci is the thing, for me, that makes the most sense. Having decentralized access to knowledge, decentralized access to the ability to do science, to pursue knowledge, and decentralized access to the funding sources for the fundamental building blocks of what it means to be alive. It's crazy that we're not at this point already. The control over these sort of things that has happened over the past 300 years, it's obscene, and hopefully DeSci can help to improve those issues. So these are some of the points about what we can use to inspire people about DeSci, how DeSci can improve the lot for the scientists. So how do we onboard people into this space once we've got their attention? So it's a bit of an uphill battle because Web3, as Rob mentioned, is plagued with scams and rug pulls and Ponzi schemes and bad media representation of all of these matters. A Ponzi scheme doesn't necessarily mean it's inherently bad. The US dollar, for example. Sorry. So look, there's many things that the media misinterprets about Web3, and we need to do a big job of educating people into what actually Web3 can do, what it does do. There's a lot of fantastic infrastructure being built, a lot of tokens out there that work very well. Something like Chainlink, for example, has many good and bad points. The great points, which is the ability to bring real-world data on-chain, and there's a presentation tomorrow about that, which you should get involved with. Bringing real-world data on-chain, making this immutable is fantastic. However, they have a token, and this token is quite predatory. This token is sold and used to fund their operations, and it's actually quite predatory, but this is how in representation in the media, it's actually a shining star of authority within the DeFi space. So it's very important to realize that the media representation of these things is biased and it's dangerous, and it will almost invariably count against the progress of DeSci. So we have to do our best to be wary of that and to educate against that within these circles, within things like this, but also with the content that we put out and the way that we talk about our products. Creativity and design, as we just mentioned, the front page aspect of an NFT is a fantastic idea. You know, using all of the technologies that we have available to us to improve the aesthetic pleasures of science is really important. Science is typically, dark grays, dark blues, light grays, light blues, maybe light blue, if you're lucky, and it's quite boring. And it's not very inspiring for scientists, for people trying to get in, but also people from the outside looking in. If you're not a scientist and this is all you see, you do just assume that everybody in science is very boring. But most people aren't. They just want to, they would like to express themselves if they had the ability. And DeSci gives you the ability, the sovereign ownership over your own platform, to express yourself in a creative way. Collaboration in itself will bring more people in. Things like this, conferences, online conversations, online collaborations, project to project to project collaborations will increase the network effect and bring more people into this space. And finally, ambition. It's important to tell people that this is an ambitious space. It's very early, we're very early, but ambitious people often benefit the most, so it's worth mentioning that. So thank you very much for listening to that. I just want to say a few words about DeSciWorld. So at DeSciWorld, we're trying to become a resource-oriented focal point for the DeSci space. We're trying to aggregate lots of information, aggregate lots of people, connect, and inspire. So if you have a DeSci project and you're not listed on our dashboard, most people here are, you can list it. It's for free. If you're looking to launch a DAO or an NFT and you want some assistance with the launching of this, the contracts of tokens of the NFT launch, we actually handle a lot of this for you, so you can come to us and ask for assistance there. It's free. Fees recovered on the other side. So free assistance, fees recovered on the other side, which is important. Peer-to-peer interactions and education. We're actually building a few peer-to-peer platforms, so stay tuned for that. And lastly, conferences and events. This is something that we are just beginning. This is our first conference, so thank you all for attending. We hope to be doing this twice a year, and we'll be going around the world outside of the global north. The second conference in December is looking to be either India or Argentina, so stay tuned. This is what our dashboard looks like. You can see some projects listed here. Okay, so please support us. If you haven't already followed us on Twitter or everything like that, you can do so here. It's all over the campus. And this is my personal contact. So if you want to contact me for anything, please scan that and we can chat. Okay, thank you.